Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So hello everybody and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology change, innovation. And this week we are majoring on branding, which is close to both myself and Ben's heart. But as always, let's kick things off with a bit of news. Okay, Ben, I'll go first. So I saw this yesterday, I think it was, regards Battleface launches space tourism travel insurance. And I think this is travel insurance that you would take out as a punter if you were going on one of these space flights. And yeah, fair enough, that's fine. Firstly, Battleface, that reminds me awfully of Battlestar Galactica from the 80s. So I'm kind of calling to question whether we're talking about branding later, but whether that's the right use of a name. But the article goes on to talk about how they see the growth of the sector to be worth about $1 trillion by 2040. And the CEO here of Battleface talks about, what they're doing, tourism, all that kind of thing. This end statement is quite interesting, I think, especially in the context of brand and building a brand. Today's landscape mirrors the early days of air travel back in the beginning of the last century. With the advent of affordable space travel, costs will come down as demand rises alongside the need for insurance. And I just fundamentally kind of disagree with the way that you can look at the aviation industry and its development back at the turn of the century and space travel. Aviation was building on years of travel by land and ship and then air, and they were going to destinations for people to do things, business, travel, holidays, whatever it was. And I just don't see the parallel to space travel. I mean, you're just going to go up there and...
Well, there's got to be some benefit. And I guess if you're very, very rich, the benefit is that you can tell people you've gone into space at the moment. But until, as you say, there are real destinations. I mean, air travel was about replacing having to be on ships for months, and all the vagaries and discomfort of that, as well as freight and everything else that sped up the world. But you're right. It's that sort of lazy thinking, isn't it? That it's this just because it's a thing that flies through the air. It's exactly the same as the other thing that flies through the air. And I'd imagine this is a very niche market. I mean, in the sort of Dragon's Den parlance, I'm out, I'd say, on this.
Yeah, me too. It's funny. According to the Lloyd's report, they are generating. It will generate a significant number of jobs and capabilities in the emerging space tourism sector. And so they're developing products that are scalable. I'm going, well, how scalable do they need to be? I mean, it's going to be pretty niche stuff, isn't it?
Probably about 10 people that can do this in the world, aren't there, really? I mean, It's not going to be a big product. I suppose they might think that there are things that come alongside this. There are other insurance opportunities, and this is a nice bit of PR to talk about this. That name reminds me of Boaty McBoatface, actually.
yeah, you're right. Good stuff. Right, let's keep with the flying theme. Ben, you've seen this article.
Yeah, you'd think we'd planned this, but we haven't. And anyway, it's about this ridiculous story that the shares of the Hartford, who Chubb, if people remember, made an approach to, which was rejected as a bid about 3 months ago. They jumped yesterday on the fact that Chubb, I presume Greenberg's private jet, had landed in the carrier's hometown airport mid-morning, signalling renewed interest. Well, I mean, if anybody's been to Hartford, I'm sure that quite a few people who are listening to this show may well have been or know about it. It is known as the centre of the world's leading centre of insurance. I mean, it genuinely is pretty insurance centric. Travelers is there, AXA XL is there, the Hartford Steamboat. There's a lot of insurers there that it could be. So they've really jumped. They've jumped literally to a conclusion on this, and who knows? But it shows it's still in play, and almost investors will almost do anything to get this story stirred up again.
Yeah, indeed. No, it's good. I like it. And then, another one here about Lemonade and a class action. This is fascinating stuff.
So Lemonade is the gift that keeps giving, I think, for insurance. I mean, it's an amazing concept, and people will argue about whether it's a real thing and how much money it's losing on or whatever. Has it got any prospects? But if people remember, this was started off by a guy who was involved with it called Dan Ariely, who is a very well-known behavioural scientist. And one of the things that they promoted is both technology and behavioural science. In other words, the kind of mix of people and technology. And the whole behavioural science thing, of course, is best known around this nudge theory that you do certain things which nudge people to do things that are right or in their interests, and therefore you can persuade certain good behaviors. And that's very attractive and appealing to insurance, obviously, because if you can get people to be honest about claims and things, you can save a lot of money. Anyway, this is a story that will be linked to something else in a second, which is about the Lemonade now facing a class action over their handling of what's known as biometric data, which is basically facial recognition data. So rather loosely, Lemonade was talking about biometrics and behaviors, as they do, about all these things. They wax lyrical on it all, and said that, soon we'll be able to tell whether people are fraudulent, just by the facial recognition stuff. So, of course, this chap, Pruden, when he had filed his claim, he was filmed, and they used apparently they've used his data. So they've used the film, and they vehemently deny that they've used this video for any kind of biometric purposes. But of course, they are now in a bit of a tricky situation because they've actually been talking about this and that they would do it. So the question, of course, would arise, and they're going to have to prove they didn't use this, as to whether they're using this, and they're not allowed to, of course, without permission, use this sort of biometric stuff to determine whether you're a fraud or not.
Yeah.
So this is the action they're facing. So now the next thing that's linked to this is a real scandal, and I think we'll hear more about this, about behavioural science. Now, this is just very briefly, if I can explain this, is that the industry, including Lemonade, has been using case studies and data and analysis of behavioural science to support various implementations of things in their processes to try and help them be more commercially successful. And one of these is to ask people to state that they're not being fraudulent at, say, the beginning of an interview or a chat about the claim, and afterwards. So by doing this, the theory went that actually that reduces fraud by 50% or whatever. And anyway, it was based on this particularly quite famous study in behavioural science, which was done about 4 or 5 years ago, based on motor policies and how many miles people drove and the accidents they had, and then these behavioural things that were put in. The short story on this is this has been now investigated by a number of kind of hobbyists who like to do this sort of thing, check out data. And it's found to be entirely fraudulent. So it's not just it's a mistake, it's a bit, it's not significant statistically. It's been made up. And the primary way they found out that this was made up is there's 2 sets of data, 2 spreadsheets basically. And one of them was in a font called Calibri, which I'm sure we all know and use on our emails, and the other is called Cambria. And so the researchers realized there's two sets of data in 2 fonts. So there's a possibility this has just been copied and pasted. And in fact, it effectively has. They added in a random number generator, but basically they just doubled up the amount of data, but also the data is entirely nonsense because none of it matches up. Because if you think of drivers, they're looking at how often they drive and how many miles they drive. Typically, there's a bell curve. Every piece of data would always show you drive 10 miles, I drive 300. In between are a load of people who do slightly less. So you get a kind of bell curve from across your graph. The data that this bunch of clowns put together, making it up, basically showed a flat thing. So there were exactly the same number of people who drove 10 miles as drove 300 miles in each column. And on top of that, there was this two-pronged thing of the Cambria and Calibri thing, where they just basically copied and pasted it to look like there was more data in there. So in so many ways, it was obviously fraudulent. And now they've said, this is lots of insurers, the important thing is lots of insurers have been using this, and they've been trying to find out who has been using it. And in their article, and I will distance myself from this, they say allegedly The Hartford is one of those companies. Now, at the end of the article, they talk about who are the suspects for doing this fraud, because it is they've actually, made up the data. So they say there were 4 people who did the report, who authored the report originally. So the first 3 couldn't have done it, but so it's either the 4th author of the report, someone in his lab or her lab, or someone at the insurance company, the Hartford. And now they're saying they've asked those people to comment, and of course they haven't had any comment back yet. But while it's a kind of good story in itself, it's an interesting story, because I don't think I've seen such a blatant making up of data. But it does say to me that, and we talked quite a lot about data on this show, people talk about data as if it's just, once you've got it, it's just okay and you can just use it, and it's like a magical dust in some way. But when you look at this sort of thing, what you realize is that data gets used by people, and once in these tricky areas like behavioral science, you get quite sort of evangelistic sort of people who believe, fundamentally that it's the right and it's the future. And when it doesn't quite show what they want it to show, they do this sort of thing. And it makes me sort of think about what's going to happen as we move further forward into the world of data in insurance, because these temptations, they won't obviously all be as obvious as this, to use data in the wrong way. And then everybody follows it, right?
Yeah.
That's the point, is that once it gets published, once it gets shown or people hear about it, they use it and they justify everything on the basis of this totally spurious rubbish. They do have an answer to this, though. One of the answers they say is that actually what all these businesses should now do, and this is a lesson maybe for the insurance market, is they must publish the raw data, so that and it's true, it would be true with my business, if you could publish the raw data, people could see it's done properly, they've taken the right, they've made the right interpretation and things. But I do see the difficulties of that, because raw data obviously is your business, that's kind of what you manufactured, and therefore it's like, giving away the secrets somehow. So there are difficulties with that. But with this sort of stuff, if you're going to go public, I think they should publish the raw data. I agree with it.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, isn't it? Because all the conversations I have with insurers and brokers across the industry, it's all about data and how you're leveraging value from it, or using it to enable automation or whatever it is. And yeah, I think there is this concept that kind of data is, once it's there, it's it's solid. It's locked. It's not going to change. I think there's 2 things to say about that. I think that isn't true. I think data becomes corrupted. We've all experienced that. The other thing is that sometimes you can use the data that you've had for something else and try to apply it to a different question. And so the data doesn't change, but the context or the question that you're trying to answer has changed, and then you're trying to then justify outcomes to that based on you haven't gone out and collected a new set of data. You've just used some data and tried to answer an existing question. So I think there are still lots of questions out there, and I think the industry suffers from a lack of understanding of some of that. And I know that we're supposed to be based on data to make underwriting decisions, but I still think we need to be collecting more data and thinking about it in those terms, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is in other areas, and I've been a promoter of this, is to say use several sources. Don't just use one source. Don't even just use the Grace Church, as good as it is. I think use several sources, and we would do this too, is to say, well, if you're seeing something interesting in this piece of data, does it appear in other pieces of data? Does it appear in the same pattern? And it's called generalized looking at data. But what seems to also have happened here with this one is that they've got one study that everybody's then grabbed on and used, but it was based on the idea, I suppose, that someone said, well, we know this is true. It's obvious if you ask Jeremy to say he's being truthful on his form, then he's more likely to be truthful. So that's obviously true. So let's just make up some data to prove that that's the case.
Yeah.
But of course, if it isn't true, then you're leading the industry up the garden path, and probably into kind of legal deep water as well. So I think this there are lessons here. It's also quite funny.
Yeah, it is. Right.
I mean, how thick could you be? Like, it's the sort of thing though that does happen. I would just say if people start to cheat one little thing, then all sorts of things get cheated. So they don't notice the things like they change the font.
Yeah.
And people always say to me in research, do you think people are honest, and could you make up the data? And I've always said if you ever try and make up market research data, it just looks such a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
If you couldn't do it, and it's harder work than doing the actual survey properly in the first place to make it up.
Yeah, it's very true. Right, let's move things along. So our main topic and all the things we've been talking about so far really come back to branding. And we wanted to talk about branding, as I said at the top of the show, because it's close to our hearts, but also because, Ben, you're launching a new kind of a business initiative, InsureIndex, at the end of September. So we thought we'd just explore, firstly, what that is, and then we can take a look at brand in a bit more detail. So what does brand mean to us? What's it mean to insurance, and what do people need to be thinking about?
Okay.
So let's start with that. What's the InsureIndex?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Jeremy. And I apologise for the shameless plug, but I think this is important, and it's something we've been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah.
And basically, InsureIndex, which we're launching, is a way to showcase those organisations that are beginning to do or doing long-term brand building. In other words, building those brands for not just for next year, but for the future, for the people and for the customer base. And so they're doing it seriously, and we know that they're out there, and we can see that they're coming through in the data, and we can see that they have success as a result of it. So the idea of InsureIndex in the first instance is to draw attention to that, and then to start to say, what does that mean? Why does it matter? And I suppose to help people in boardrooms, particularly, to understand more about both marketing and branding and the different things that you can do with this to create success in business. And then the other thing I think that's important about it is that we also know and we're seeing that partnerships are becoming really important in insurance. So what you've got is, for example, technology brands working with traditional insurer brands, and then brokers as well. So in the unique world of the kind of distribution of commercial insurance, you've got lots of brands all working together, sometimes in concert, sometimes against each other, but where the value is quite tricky to work out. So I think that's the other area that we're getting more interested in, is what's the kind of interaction and the outcome of, say, Marsh the other week saying we're using Whitespace. Well, there's two brand names, right? And one's a big broker, you kind of get a sense, don't you, of, they've got a cool bit of trading technology and they're Marsh. So Marsh benefits and Whitespace benefits from so these sorts of ideas we're measuring, and we're starting to measure more. So the index is about some of those measures and what impact they have on the bottom line and the growth of those businesses.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really important, and will just be a really interesting insight, as with my marketeer's hat on, which I normally have on. It will be fascinating. So let's just start off with what brand means for the insurance sector, and we're talking here specialty.
Yeah.
And we've got this insurance kind of brand map here. I'll tell you what, let's start, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's pull it back to the 20 years of brand, because I think that's probably a good starting.
Yeah. Let's start here. So this shows we've been measuring the London market brands for the last about 18 years, actually. 18, 19 years. Let's call it 20. Round it up. But if you think that brand hasn't played a role or hasn't been part of this, then you should have a look at this slide, because what it shows is all the brands that have come and gone. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, the brand and the reputation of these businesses has been significant in terms of, their final valuation when they were sold, some of them, but also their success as they grew their businesses. Now, if you look back in 2002, there was a business called Wellington, there was a business called Catlin, and they were pretty small then. But about that time, Catlin, of course, if people remember that far back, took over Wellington and became, from about 2005, 2006, as you can see in this chart, became the dominant player. So Catlin, for about 10 years, was the dominant brand in London. And through that period, it grew very quickly, not just because of its brand, of course, but because of its ambition and its people and its talent and its investment. But brand was a big part of this, and brand was about its build and its reputation. And what that created was a huge amount of consideration, as we call it, among brokers, so that they were like the big supermarket, right? They had everything, and they could do anything, and they could start to do it globally. So in London, they were a real kind of go-to business, and everybody knew them. So about that time, you can see at the top there, this is about 1 in 2 brokers would have spontaneously thought of Catlin first as the insurer of choice, and so that was it. And then you can see there's other brands here that have come and gone and had a more difficult time, and I'll just point to AIG, which has always been kind of there or thereabouts. We know it's a very dominant player, but for quite a while, when it collapsed in the financial crash after a scandal and had to be bailed out by the US government, it changed its name in Europe to Chartis. So for quite a while, we had this thing called AIG that became Chartis. So that was another facet of branding where you changed the narrative, and took the attention away from a problem. And then when that had kind of settled, they built back up. So over time, these brands have come and gone. So, recently now we've had Catlin was sold to XL, became XL Catlin. And you can see there on the right, the grey bar, they became nearly as dominant, if you like, as AXA XL. But since the AXA, they've kind of dropped off a bit. And, that's because of some remediation, as we know about, and other things. But the brands come up and down and move around, and they are very closely aligned to whether brokers will consider them. So choice is based on this kind of knowledge, this favorability. And so that's kind of interesting and important, and it will carry on as we go forward. But what we have got, of course, is a lot of consolidation at the same time going on. So we've got fewer insurers, basically. So the importance of brand in a very crowded market like insurance in London is really, I'd say, is really paramount, because normally you have, most markets you have 4 or 5 big players that you've heard of, or 5 or 6 if you think of banking or anything else, and that's it. In this market, you have, well, we haven't put them all on here, but there's probably 20 odd at least that you would say are significant players. Now, what's different about any of them? What's better about AXA XL versus Chubb?
Yeah.
What's better about MS Amlin versus Beazley? That's the sort of thing that they now are starting to have to do, move away from that traditional kind of standard branding, as I'd call it, into something that's more targeted and specialized.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot on the show about kind of getting the board to buy into, brand as a concept, as you just outlined then. So what in your experience has worked in convincing them that it's something that they need to invest in?
Well, I'd say, first of all, it's really, really difficult. I mean, I don't think it's easy. And what a lot of people try and do is to put some sort of statistics in front of the boardroom to say why long-term branding is more important than just sales activation or, building up the top line over a short period. You need both, obviously, in marketing terms. You need both. What the theory would tell you is that if you only do the short-term stuff, eventually you start to tail off because you don't build in that trust and consideration over time.
Yeah.
So it is hard. I think what you've got to do is you've got to do it by example, and you've got to show where other businesses are doing it well. You can do that out of sector. You can do it by showing people like Amazon and things. Amazon started TV advertising. It wasn't just about the sales. So you can start remember that board members typically are not marketing people. They don't have that as part of their expertise, and they certainly don't know much about brands or branding. And many of them still think it's just, it's not that they're against it. I don't think they understand it particularly, so they don't want to be kind of shown up by just punting for something they don't understand.
Yeah.
And particularly, I think in traditional commercial insurance, they're much more about the spreadsheet side of things, the financial side. That's where the skills lie, not in this. But they're beginning to now build brands. And what we can see here is just how, and I've shown this before, is just how the market is developing in brand terms. And this is around 4 key measures that we use, we call brand personality. So innovation, honesty or trust, prestige and power. Now, these are basically about how you position your business. So you can see there is now a coalescence of certain businesses around innovation, and innovation tends to relate really not to real, kind of technology innovation or things like that. It's about just being dynamic and doing stuff, going places. Lots of people, young people in particular, want to work for innovative businesses because they'll be busy and exciting, fast places to work, right? The other side is these kind of more prestigious businesses. Now, these are about financial strength and profit, and these are attractive too, if you talk about talent, but also to people buying their policies because they're financially strong and they're stable and they've got the wherewithal, to pay your claim at one level or to give you a great career with some nice bonuses if you go and work there, and there's other things that layer on top of that. And the other sort of, but what has been happening is a lot of the old Lloyd's players, which were smaller specialists who tended to coalesce around this kind of trustworthy face-to-face kind of smaller feel of a business, have moved into that prestige or that innovation space.
Yeah.
So you've got a bifurcation of the market into big, kind of relatively powerful, but kind of prestigious type organizations, and probably slightly smaller, more dynamic kind of things. And that feels to me like quite a healthy sort of place, but it's constantly changing now, and it needs explanation as it goes through. And you need to understand where you're positioned in all of this if you're going to be successful, because you won't know why you're not getting the business if you're kind of in the wrong place. Yeah,
indeed. And I think that comes back to a lot of the time on the show we talk about the purpose. Or, what is the purpose of an organization? Why are you actually doing something? Not to make money, but what is it that you are doing that helps clients and customers and other people, and creates competitive advantage that other people can't replicate. And I think what's really important, I think, about branding is that you've got to have a real sense of what that purpose is and that why is, because if you don't, then the brand can very easily fall away, because you can't communicate it to your people, and then your people cannot think about the concept of what they're doing in those terms, and they can't communicate it to their customers and clients.
And I think that's right. And I think that's been, quite a lot of the thinking. And it used to be called mission statement, then vision, and now it's purpose. And in essentially, they're all the same thing, is that actually we're here not just for the money and the profit, although, that's what a lot of businesses are there for. But they're saying there is more to it than that. And you have a kind of duty, and this is true with things like ECG and, ESG, and things that are, things that are changing in that, and fair value. So that there is a role to play that is wide in that, and that's where the regulators come in particular, because they're sort of putting pressure on large organizations, not just in insurance, but all around the world and the globe, to be more responsible, because the capitalist model now, as it's evolved, is not just about the profit, it's about how you create a better life, for people in a better world, I suppose. So that is there too. But when you come back to the brass tacks of business, and that's what InsurIndex is also about, is about what are the things that we're going to measure, because the trouble with things like purpose is it's quite woolly.
Yeah.
And it's used, some are good at it and some are terrible, and you can, that. But when it comes down to these boards, I mean, ultimately, they do really need to know what's going to make those businesses go better and which things should they be focusing on. And if you take 2 very quick examples, part of the business that we work with is about saying, how do we get more business, profitable business, quality business, whatever you call it. And that goes through intermediaries and all sorts of other ways now, some of it direct. and it's down to the products. But then the other thing is talent, because the industry is heavily this is heavily reliant on good quality talent and is struggling for that. So, and both to retain it and to attract. So brand is also playing in there too. So it isn't just, it's multifaceted. And the one thing we do know though, if you don't kind of build this and understand where this kind of marketing effectiveness is, you'll waste money for a start, because you might not do as much marketing, but you'll do a bit, and that will be a total waste of money.
Yeah.
And you'll be losing out competitively because this other organization who's up the road will be saying things more coherently, more cohesively, and they'll create that little bit of extra trust, that little bit of edge that, whether it's the broker or the customer or whatever says, yeah, I think I'll go for that policy over them.
Yeah. So let's play a clip from the London Market Preview show from Claire Constable, because I think this kind of exemplifies it. Because I start off by asking her about the return to the office, and towards the end of this clip, which is only a few minutes long, she's very quickly turned it back to the people, the customers, clients, and delivering the claims promise. So let's have a look at this clip, and then we'll come back.
What COVID has done is accelerated what has been tried in the past anyway. To the mindset point, I think it has shifted the whole working from home mindset. I'd heard many times before this happened, if you're working from home, you're not working, Claire, are you really? And I'm certainly I'm a big proponent for what I would call beforehand the working from home mummies. And shouldn't say that anymore. It's for parents as well as mummies, but that was what it was. And they were some of the hardest working people in both my teams before and this team. And so with this mindset shift, I'm really, really glad, and I hope it continues, that it is understood people are being productive just as much, even more so in cases, at home as they are if they're in the office. What we need to do as within our company, and we're already started those conversations, is define what is productive in the office and what is productive more at home. Some of your kind of more project focused, when you need the very linear energy, you can do at home. And also, I don't think it's just about the venue either. I think it's also about the times. We say we're a global, and certainly my company, my claims team is a global claims team. Even if they're sitting in London or in their work at home offices, they are dealing with clients all over the world. So why not use it as an opportunity to flex into different times as well as different venues? So that's where we are with our mindset, and we are having lots of discussions about what's very important to the purpose of the office. And when I say the purpose of the office, I also mean the purpose of coming into the city. So we can go and sit in any of our co-insurers' offices or the brokers' offices to have client meetings, but I still am a massive proponent of face-to-face, but we can discuss that later. And you asked me, what am I focusing on prioritizing in the claims service at the moment? So it's really, to me, it's still all about the people. And for this instance, my people, my team, but looking at it from the customer perspective. So everyone's had to embrace massive uncertainty. So one of the biggest things that I've done is helped my team with courses and tools and everything to embrace change themselves, because they've had to embrace it personally and professionally, and kind of had to hold the hands of some of our clients through it. And clients quite rightly still demanded speed and demanded transparency and demanded communication, whatever forum it was in. So we've really, really focused on that at the moment. And then, like everyone else, we are also looking at, I think we're going to discuss it in a moment, where we are in the market modernisation journey, Blueprint 2, and we can discuss that in a moment, and also what's our internal journey. We know there are certain different types of claims, and different types of claims can have different solutions to make them the cheapest way of processing it. and the fastest way of processing it, but still then focusing on understanding the data and really what the client needs at the end of the day, which robots haven't worked out empathy yet. So we still do empathy. We still do all of that experience and insights we have. That's how we can keep benefiting the customer and paying their claims quickly as.
So is it a great clip from the preview show, and you can actually register because that's going to be aired again next Thursday. So you can register for that and watch the whole interview. But like I said at the beginning, it's really interesting that she starts off talking about the return to office and very quickly gets into the purpose of the organization, the people in there, the importance of having their client service and claim service delivering speedily. And it's clear that they've got that messaging right, and you can see it throughout the kind of the brand that Claire's talking about there.
Yeah, and I think that if you take something like HDI Global, that's one of these new players that's come up. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's actually now got a very ambitious plan and strategy to grow to be a global player. So I really think it's interesting in the insurance market at the moment, and you do have to look at each market on its merits, because much as what has been written about brand, and this is part of the reason for starting InsurIndex, is about FMCG type, brands, Unilever, Procter & Gamble and Netflix and all those sorts of things, which are consumer type brands. Now, there's a lot of thinking that's gone on, a lot of data and a lot of research that's gone on around those things, and there's still a great debate. But the insurance industry is changing, as we know, quite rapidly, but it's not just consolidating. That's one aspect. But this other aspect is that new businesses like HDI Global, there's others like Mosaic and Beat and things, they're coming in and saying, okay, so we think we can throw off the legacy stuff and be new, clean, shiny things that are really doing this better and differently. And some of the things that Claire's talking about are, right in that sweet spot, really. And I don't know the answer to this. You just have to look at, in the end, you have to look at data and try and get your head around it. But these are all ultimately organizations that want to build a reputation, and they also want to beat each other. They want to murder the competition so they win. Let's not beat about the bush. And so to do that, they've got to get their message out there. They've got to get that positioning right. So, Claire's fantastic, but she can't just do that on her own two claims. She's got to do that through the whole of HDI Global. So you start to say, how do we align all these things and what things matter? So one of the things we glibly say is, well, claims is really important. It's part of the promise. Well, yes, but most boards don't have a claims person on them. They don't necessarily put it at the top of the tree. It's often still the back office and not front of shop. So is it just lip service, and is it really about sales and products and just peace of mind and things like that matter? So we've got to start. I think the good thing is the market is changing, and I think that's what I would say, is that it's not going to be like the last 30 years. It's going to change dramatically. And so focusing on these brands as they're building now and listening and having these conversations and getting data and, like I said earlier on, looking for patterns will start to tell us about what this might look like by, say 2030.
Yeah.
Where I think it'll look very different. That map we showed, the map will be different. There'll be fewer brands, but it might completely split into very small specialists and real massive global entities. But it's all evolving, and so it needs to be understood clearly.
Yeah, I agree. And like, you can look at other industries that perhaps don't have brands so much. And I think we were talking about hedge funds. There is an option to say, like, well, we're not going to invest in this. We're just going to be pure capacity.
If you're a commodity, that's it. And I think businesses will need to decide that too. Are you a commoditized, a follower, for example, brick Kai or whatever it's called, and that sort of thing. There's not much of a brand to brick Kai. So basically, there's a bit of technology and a couple of people. There's not much underwriting that goes on. I don't believe in that sort of thing. So only has a certain distance to go as a brand, and has a certain amount of sort of traction, I suppose. But when you look at something like an AIG or a Chubb or whatever, they could be doing anything, and the insurance industry, as it faces up to climate change and things like that, there's huge opportunities to really show superiority and take opportunities. But if you don't have a name behind it, you can't do it. Your battle face.
Yeah, yeah. Battle face. I'm going to do more research into Battle face. I'm starting to love them. Right.
I think they did that after one too many drinks one evening.
Yeah, you've got your battle face on. So we're gonna continue looking at this, and obviously when you start getting the data, we'll come back and start looking at it again. Very good. Right, excellent. Thanks, Ben. That was good. Right, what are you doing this weekend? Anything?
It's going to get warm. Indian summer's coming. Sunday's going to be very warm, so it's barbecue time. Get the shorts out again.
Yeah, as soon as the kids go back to school, nailed on, the sun comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Go. Yeah, there we go.
That's going to be good. You?
I have the kids this weekend. My wife's at work. If it's going to be nice, I'm sure we'll be out and about.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Very good. Excellent. Right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We shall see you next week.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap up.